and we go live straight away. So there is no, she says, hello, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to UK Crime Book Club. This afternoon, as part of August Fest, I'm delighted to be joined by a whole bevy of law writers who, as you can see along the bottom, is what James, Laura, and Imran. So I'm going to ask them first if they would like to introduce themselves and also their books. So who wants to head off?
I don't mind starting. I'm first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Imran Mahmood. I'm a practicing criminal barrister and the author of 4 standalones. The current one, the latest one, is Finding Sophie. This is probably going to come up backwards, but it's Finding Sophie. It's kind of a missing persons thriller, but told from the perspective of the parents. A young girl, Sophie, goes missing, and every parent's worst nightmare. And these 2 parents, the father and the mother, they each find different ways of trying to look for their daughter to find out what happened to her. And there's a very, very creepy man on the street. And in between it all, there's a trial at the Old Bailey. Somebody is on trial for murder, but we don't know who.
Exciting. I'm just sorry, I'm just saying, I just had a thing through to say that we weren't live, but I think we are now. So I think we have got a little bit of a lag, as we thought we might have. Great, that sounds really exciting. So this is your fourth book, this one.
Yeah, number 4.
And Laura?
Yeah, hi, my name's LJ Shepherd. I'm also a practicing barrister, perhaps a bit pretentiously a human rights barrister. And my book is The Trials of Lila Dalton. And it's about a woman called Lila who finds herself in a courtroom with no memories of anything before that point. And she discovers that she's a barrister and she's supposed to be representing the person in the dock who is accused of mass murder. And so with no memories of who she is or any knowledge of the case, she has to try and work out how to represent this person and also piece together her sort of broken past. And it's my very first book. So yeah, that's my debut.
It's also fabulous. I've read it. Yeah,
it sounds fascinating.
It's a brilliant book. It's really, really very worth picking up. In fact, I've got my copy here. Just
Thank you.
No, as I've been researching all of your books today, you've just added about another 6 or 8 onto my list. So thanks for that. And James, your book number 2, is it right?
Yes, so I've had 2 books published this year by Bloodhound Books. So the first was a legal thriller called Indefensible, and that I thought I was writing the first professional ethics thriller ever, but I was sadly corrected on that matter when I saw a film over Christmas, which made it clear that I was about 50 years out of date. So, but my day job is in professional ethics for the Law Society, and I used to work for the Bar Council. So, Imran, we may even have spoken 10 years ago if you ever phoned the hotline for the Bar Council.
Yeah, I phoned the hotline a lot, and I think the way it goes is at the beginning of your career, you phone it all the time. The older you get, the less or you get tails away. But certainly 10 years ago, I almost certainly did phone and talk to you, I reckon.
But little did you know that I was taking notes on all the calls so I could write them into novels 10 years later. But my second book is called The Company She Keeps, and that isn't a legal thriller, it's a psychological thriller set in Yorkshire at the time of the Yorkshire Ripper. So that investigation is going on while the main character, who's a successful businesswoman, is having problems with her own love life. So yeah, that's me.
So I mean, I was fascinated when the opportunity came up to speak to you all. One, because I don't know how you all find the time to write with having the careers that you do. So I was interested in that. but also how you sort of got published and you managed to sort of weave that into your day jobs.
Yeah, in fact, my debut novel, You Don't Know Me, is a story about a young man who is sacked by his lawyer, so sacked by his barrister, or rather, he sacks his barrister, and then he has to do his own closing speech, and that came about because I was in a murder case and I was kind of getting the speech ready, and as I walked past courtrooms, I heard this guy sacking his barrister. And I remember just catching the end of it. And the barrister said, "I don't think that's a very good idea." And he said, "Well, you're sacked." He says, "Well, we're at speeches. We're right at speeches." He says, "Well, I'll do my own speech." And that was all that's all I caught of it. And I thought, I wonder what that would sound like. And then when I got upstairs to prepare the speech, that was the thing that was on my mind. And I started writing a speech as if I was a defendant in kind of that voice. And what would be really important to me when I was doing a speech, because when we did speeches in criminal cases, we concentrate on the burden of proof, the standard of proof, where the evidence is, and all of that. But as a defendant, I just thought, well, what you're going to want to say is, "Oh, look, if you were in my shoes and if you had to live with the things that I have to live with every day, and if you saw the things I saw, you'd do exactly what I did." And so that's how that came about, and that the start of that book, as I say, was written in court, and then like a speech. So I didn't intend to write a criminal novel, a crime novel. I just was just trying it out, and it was only when it got to the end of it. Most speeches are like maybe an hour, half an hour, 2 hours at the most. By the time I finished it, it was 10 days. It's 10-day speech. And then I just sent it out to see what was happening with it. I think I was just very lucky. It was just timing was there, and I was just very lucky. Although I had shown it to my wife, and I asked her whether it was any good, and she said, "I said, do you think this could be published?" And she said, "Yeah, I've read loads of books which are published, which are much worse than this."
Learning by faint
Yeah, backhanded compliment.
It's such a great frame narrative, yeah. Because clients, as you say, they often want to talk about anything which is just not the actual facts of the case. So they want to tell you all about, but you don't understand. They were really irritating. And
What about you guys? How did you start yours? Had you always kind of been writing when you were younger?
I used to write plays. I've had probably 15 or 20 plays produced, and a few on the radio as well. And then I never had the confidence to write prose until about 10 years ago. I thought, I'm just going to try a few short stories. And then I got obsessed by short stories and had probably 30 or 35 published. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to try a novel. So the first one I wrote was the one that's just been published, and then I moved on to the second one, which was the first one that was published. So that's Indefensible. And but I'm not a barrister, but the main character is a barrister, and I had a lot of help from obviously from barristers,
people phoning up.
And the people phoning up.
Yeah. Imagine when they're on the phone. Can I just ask you this little question? It might seem insignificant.
It's usually it's very often barristers who would like to withdraw from a case that's an absolute nightmare, actually, and quite often the advice was, well, actually, I don't think you can technically withdraw.
This would happen a lot. You phone up praying that they'd say, "Yeah, you can withdraw." Often the worst things would happen. And my clients locked me in a room. He threatened to kill me. And you phone through and they go, "Well, I think you're probably okay. Probably okay to carry on." Just get some security.
What about you, Laura?
Yeah, so I'd been writing for years. I did it as a kid and things like this. As a teenager, I'd write novels and things like that. Never finished anything. And then when I was in my 20s, I wrote my first novel. Wasn't very good. Carried on writing. And what I was writing was, I guess, like historical fiction. And I really like atmospheric novels, and I think that's partly why I wanted to write historical fiction. But I just hated the research. I have so little time anyway that the idea of spending a Saturday reading about something I just didn't care about was just, hell to me. And so I'd been putting it off for ages because I didn't really want to write a legal thriller for all sorts of reasons, not least because it's like a busman's holiday. And then I just thought, well, the best way to avoid research is just to write about something that I already know about. And then I thought, well, the books I really like have quite high concepts and have a bit of a sort of Black Mirror element to them. And so I thought that was the best way of me kind of combining what I wanted to write with what I knew. And then I had the idea to write a legal thriller with a speculative twist.
I love this idea of writing what you know. And even though in my book I had a 10-day speech, nobody ever wrote to me to say, you can't have a 10-day speech, because I think they thought, well, you must know what you're talking about. And it made me laugh because a friend of mine, Vasim Khan, he writes historical fiction, and he said one of his things was that he had a Willys Jeep, an American Jeep, in this, like, it had 2 lines in this book. And this guy wrote to him saying, "Wow, you said on line 15 that they wound down the window in the Willys Jeep, and I should tell you that the Willys Jeep doesn't have windows that can be wound down, so that's a mistake." So he wrote to him and apologized and said, "Oh, I'm really sorry." Blah blah blah. Anyway, so then he'd written like the 3 books in the series, and in the 3rd book, sure enough, the guy writes again and says, "Well, I did write to you the first time." Now, on page 54, your Willys Jeep is still having the windows.
Oh no.
I had a situation, in a writing group so one of the things that happens at the very beginning of my novel is that it's quite a junior barrister who is the main character, and she realizes that she's having to take over from her Silk, who is the sort of senior barrister who more often than not would do a murder trial, particularly one that's as high profile as this one. And I had somebody in my writing group say, "Oh, she wouldn't be doing it." I said, "Well, yeah, she would. She's the junior. That's literally why you have junior counsel." And a couple of weeks previously, my friend was doing a murder trial, a couple of years older than me. And I was like, "Oh, it's fantastic. Congratulations." He went, "Yeah, but like, if something happens to Caroline, like, I'm representing this guy." And I was like, "Oh yeah, like, it's not the jolly, you think it is being led." And I had something similar happen to me last year. I was being led. My leading counsel got COVID, and then so 3 days before this big speech, I had to turn up and do it. And so I just thought back to this guy who was like telling me that I was wrong, and I just thought, no, I know what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, that happened to me as well. Last minute, my leader was, in those days, for some reason they thought it was okay to do 2 trials at once. So he was running one trial in Birmingham and then one trial in London at the same time. And he phoned through from Birmingham and said, I'm not going to be able to get there. You're going to have to do the cross-examination." So you're literally giving me no notice. And he says, "It's all right. Just have me on the other end of the line." I said, "I can't have you on the phone." He says, "Put your earpiece in," and I said, "No, I definitely can't do that." But yeah, absolutely no notice. Yeah, it's horrifying when that happens. I'm going to do it to my juniors. That's
And you didn't have any of his notes or anything, Imran? Nothing.
No, because it was. In fact, it was back in quite in the old days, and he tried to fax them he faxed his notes to Chambers, and then they tried to fax those to the courtroom, but then they got lost. And then when I got them, there was like a big stripe down the middle. It was just, obviously, it was awful. Anyway, so you if you wanted to write a horror, there's one right there.
Yeah, that sounds very tense and very stressful. And I guess that thing about the readers as well is that you will always get that in whatever genre you write. Is that, if you're doing police procedural, historical, anything, the reader will gladly point out if you've done something wrong.
Oh, the thing I've just to slightly segue, James, was to ask you about short stories, because I love short stories, and I quite often get asked to write them, but I'm not very good at not very good at writing them. And I think they're really difficult. Do you find that there is a like there are rules for short stories
To be
which are
honest,
different from that?
yeah, I mean, my short stories are completely different from my novels. Funnily enough, they're much more kind of quirky and breaking all the rules, actually. So one of the first ones I had published was a legal thing, and it was called had a very catchy title, R versus Seeger, additional documents disclosed by the Crown Prosecution Service, and the short story was literally a bundle of documents, and so it was faxes, it was diary entries, it was letters. But if you read them, you kind of got the whole story and backstory of this woman who had kind of stabbed somebody, and it was sort of enormous fun to write, and I got that inspiration from reading complaints bundles actually at the bar
Oh,
council, because you could pick up a file and leaf through all these bits of information, or much like a document that's disclosed, or a bundle of documents that's disclosed, and just by reading through all these fragmented pieces, you build this incredible story. And it was just and I once had an amazing story that I read with full of twists and turns, and it was literally a complaints file that had been sent by Bindman's solicitors to the bar
amazing.
council, and that's what gave me the idea for that short story. That it just seemed a great way of exploring things. So I tend to break the rules a lot when I'm writing short stories, and I found the novel market a bit more conservative, shall we say, and if you're with a commercial publisher like mine, they're more interested in your kind of 3-act story structure, and
Well,
ticking boxes.
that's really interesting because I think Janice Hallett did her
Yeah.
book, The Appeal, was essentially
Yeah,
a
but all of
full-length
hers are.
novel.
Yeah, they're all
Yeah,
sort of like it. They have all like, yeah, and the new one she's got out, which is called The Examiner.
Examiner.
It's
Yeah, that's
Oh,
also. I mean,
really?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah. It's just like so. The Appeal was faxes, document, or
Yes.
emails, and all of that,
Yeah.
and
yeah,
you got the story. And her latest one, they are art students, and they can communicate on a kind of app, and it's got basically their chats, and
Yeah.
you get the entire thing through that. So
Yeah.
you might have originated that, James. You
Well,
might
I
I
have
did
think
said
so.
it.
something.
Mine was published, I think, in 2015 or 2016,
Yeah,
and
she must
Yeah, I
have
think
read yours
and
and gone, I've
well,
got a great idea for a book.
there's another famous novelist I won't mention who did tell me she'd read it and then published a big best-selling book with documents in it, but it wasn't entirely documents. But but
Oh.
anyway,
I hope
yeah.
hope you got a cut.
And I did one short story which was um, notes left by a barrister to his cleaner, and the cleaner's response is written on the actual notes themselves, and that told a very kind of troubled family story with his son and stuff, and her, the cleaner. So
I
so
love
yeah.
this. I'm going to steal that format for the next time somebody asks me to write a book.
But yeah, no,
can
I would
I
love to do sort of more experimental stuff like that in a novel, but I haven't actually managed to achieve that. Yeah.
I was going to say, can I ask? You sort of touched on it slightly about you being inspired to write what you know, Laura. You said, and also you both said about using sort of information and knowledge that you've got from your own careers and things. Is there anything that you feel restricted about writing about because of your jobs? Is there anything you wouldn't go near, or is there stuff that you couldn't write about?
Not for me, really. I mean, the main difficulty with writing about this sort of stuff, when you actually know a lot about it, is to try and not bog it down with too much procedure and detail, because actually that's what law is all about. It's about procedure. It's about the devil is in the detail. It's all about that. And you can win cases. I once, again, when I did crime, I once got a case struck out, pretty much. I can't remember what it's called in crime anymore, but I got it struck out on the basis that there was some sort of technical difficulty with the case. They couldn't prove which dog had bitten this person and things like that. And so the more you know about that stuff, the better a barrister you are. The more you put that in a novel, the worse novelist you are. And so it's really, really difficult to tread that line whilst also having a sense of realism in the book. And I often think that's why with crime books, quite often the detective is a bit of a maverick who throws out the rule book, because nobody actually wants to read about somebody doing everything properly, because
really
it's so boring. So that's the main difficulty.
Yeah, that is interesting.
I think there's definitely something in that, and like I've got scenes in my book where there's a trial happening, and if I had to write a real cross-examination, that would be half the book, because there's so much kind of background and setting up and asking really dull questions that just to kind of lead you to the questions that you want to ask. So you couldn't put all of that in, and you couldn't put all evidence in. You've just got to, I think, as Laura said, just highlights with the light touch, just to give them the flavor of the book, and to reassure them that you know what you're talking about, and also to make it, I think, realistic. I think that's probably quite important. But I wouldn't, just to answer your question, the thing I haven't yet written about is sex. I never put any sex in my books, and that's because my mum reads the books basically too embarrassed to write any sex scenes in them. So I don't know what they would probably also be awful. I don't know whether either of you do that, kind of typically have sex scenes in books, but
in my second book there's going to be, yes, that's an exclusive.
Right.
I do have sex scenes in both of my books, and my first book was chosen as a book club book at my work, actually. So we all discussed it at the Law Society, and one of my colleagues who really liked the book, she said, "Really like your book, James, but the sex scenes are just horrific." I just can't look at you in the same way again. And she never explained what exactly was so horrific about them, but unfortunately, she didn't like the sex scenes in my second book either. But there you go. But can I go back to stop talking about sex for a moment and go back to the kind of verisimilitude question? I think you were getting at, or at least Imran was talking about, because I don't have the experience of being a practicing barrister, so to make up for that, I put real barristers and real clerks in my legal thriller. So it's set in the 90s, but it's got two clerks who were practicing at the time, and I've also got George Carman, the barrister. It's his chambers that it's set in, and in the background I've got real crime. I've got the Fred and Rose West murders in the background. So to make up for my lack of legal knowledge, I've attempted to cram all this real stuff in. And
do they all keep their names, their real names? The clerks?
Yeah, they kept their real names, and so the clerks, who are David Goddard and Bill Connor, they're both kind of senior clerks. They both agreed to be in the book, and when it came to be launched, they kind of started a small fire on LinkedIn by saying, this book's just been published, and we're in it as characters being ourselves, and I got a lot of legal traction because of that from day one, which was really nice.
Because in Finding Sophie, my thing opens up with a trial, and the guy who's the barrister in it is based on somebody who I know really very well, and I was in his chambers for 15 or 20 years. And what I'd done was I'd given him a name in the book, intending to change it to a different name, and I forgot. So it's still got his name in it. I just so far just hoping that you'll never pick it up, because it's not. It's not the most flattering kind of.
Has it got his surname in as well?
Yeah. It's got his surname in it, and describes him really quite accurately, because he's barrister kind of known for, like, kind of known across the bar, and he's got like quite a shrill voice, and he's quite little, and he's very shouty, and he's always very angry. And if he ever read it, I can't imagine he wouldn't know it was him.
Well, with his name, it's a bit of a clue, isn't it?
Well, I could use a double bluff and say, well, of course not you. I wouldn't use your name if it was you.
Well, it's just somebody, but it's just I just use your name because it just came into my head, and it's completely not based on you. Were your characters, were they happy? Were your real people, James? Were they happy with how you portrayed them?
Yeah, they were really happy. Bill Connor's quite a central character because he has to deal with this barrister who's going off the rails a bit, and has to sort of give him talking to and keep talking about being professional, all this kind of stuff. And Bill really liked it because I did portray him in a sensible way, making the kind of decisions I think he would have made at that time. So and David Goddard just appears in a party scene where he comes and tells this story about the last Chambers party he went to in this place where he met Tony Blair, and they spent the whole evening together, and Tony Blair didn't know anyone, and that was a true story that David Goddard always tells, actually. So I think he's quite pleased it's ended up in a book.
You won't have to tell it anymore. You can just say, read James's book. It's all in there. It's my life. You've basically written their memoirs for them.
But I did show them the text as I worked on it, because I wasn't as cavalier as Imran. Risking lawsuit. I wanted to be sure that they were happy, but also they were really great on small details which I got wrong in Chambers' life. So it was a good check on that kind of stuff too.
But Laura, you go slightly the other way because yours is quite high concept rather than kind of accurate in that way. But which I loved. What made you do something so high concept?
I love that sort of idea. I love having things that have got a great twist, and I just wanted to write something that had a great hook as well, because I was trying to obviously get published at the time, and I just knew that the best way of doing that would be to have a great hook. But I did have quite a few quite realistic details in my book. I mean, the clerk in mine, Tony, was the criminal clerk in my chambers. He only says 2 lines, so it's fine. There is just this behavior, I'd say, in my book that's taken from real life. There's a comment in the very first chapter where somebody makes a comment about the main character's skirt that was genuinely said behind my back by an opponent to one of my friends.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, just the sort of general, what we call old soldiering, which is when people who are more senior sort of try and pretend that their case is so much better than it is, and use the force of their personality to try and get you to back down on certain points. That, I mean, I've had loads of that. So that was just great. That was all grist to the wheel. So, and so I try to kind of put in those realistic details, but then outside of court, that's when things go a bit wild, but inside court is a bit more realistic.
Yeah, I once got talking about that kind of barristers leaning on each other. I once got today it's quite subtle, so they'll do that thing about you've got no defense, or you've got no case. But back in those days it was less subtle, and I was once taken into a room. The barrister locked the door, basically locked me in, and said, you better get your client to plead, otherwise it's going to be real trouble here. Threatened me. Yeah, and then at one point said, I wish I could lock you in a concrete room. And I was like, yeah, so it's not like so much like that now.
I have been shut in a room, not locked, but I was shut in a room once when it was back when I was in the magistrate's court, and this solicitor sort of, I did feel a little bit sorry for him because he was having a sort of breakdown's the wrong word, but he was really, really stressed about this case because he was like, these are good people. And I was like, I can't help but the fact that your clients are good people. He knew they were going to get convicted because obviously they'd done it, but he just felt they were good people and they needed to be let off. And he just shut the door and he was like, you need to understand. And I was
like,
I used to work with barrister mediators at the Bar Council, and there was this horror story going around. This barrister mediator who began the session by withdrawing a gun and saying, "We are going to get a result today in this mediation."
Oh my
I mean,
God.
I think it was a kind of joke, but it was a bit of a, bit of a risky one.
My old pupil master fired a gun in court.
Ooh.
Yeah, this was years ago. Just slightly going off subject. It was so it was one of those. I think it was like an umbrella or a walking stick, which also fired like a
Oh, I know.
round. And he knew he was doing it, and his defense that the guy was up for like attempted murder. And his defense was the thing just went off by accident, and so he had it loaded, and he had this stick and he had a round in it, and he was hoping it would just go off, and he kept banging it on the desk. And when you saw this stick, and then after about the 20th time, it went off.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it didn't have like a live round; it had a blank in it, and the thing went off. But there's pandemonium, but nothing happened to him. Nothing happened to him. Yeah, in court, you couldn't get away. That wouldn't happen today, Laura. Just so you know.
No.
You sort of mentioned that quite a bit. You sort of said it wouldn't happen today. So has it changed sort of as you've gone through your careers? Has because they were talking about that this morning in the police panel and how much policing's changed. So I assume if policing's changed, law has changed alongside with it. What's sort of been the big things?
I can tell my experience in one story, which was back in the old days. They used to bring exhibits to court. If you asked them, they would bring them, and that was whatever the exhibit was, whether it was a knife or a gun or whatever. And in this case, they used to bring the cocaine. It was a cocaine case, and they would bring the cocaine to court, and then you'd say, the prosecutor would say, "Well, just show it round to the jury," and the copper would cut open the bag of cocaine and pass it round the jury, and they'd kind of like go, let's have a look at this bag with powder in it. And there was once, the reason it stopped was that the one time it happened, it was going round, and there was a student at the back in the jury who was looking at it wide-eyed, and as it came to him, mouthed the words, "Got this bag," and put his entire face in this bag. And there was powder everywhere, and you could just imagine the court just erupted. The judge was going bananas. The prosecution wanted him charged, but then they couldn't charge him because he was lawfully in possession of this cocaine. Yeah, so that kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. They don't just bring a bag of cocaine to show the jury. But yeah, and people would play tricks, and all of this kind of stuff would happen. Antics. It's much more serious now, I think, as a profession.
It's more professional is the wrong word, but it's become way more corporate in a way, I guess. Like we have all these sort of directories and things like that, and people try to do articles and things. Whereas I think my understanding of the old days, as it were, is that people were way more relaxed in certain regards. You leave court on a Friday and go to the pub, and people were. I mean, there is still a problem with drink at the bar, but not to the extent it was so normalized. And again, like going back to stories, I think people now would be much more likely to complain about things, whereas back then I think everyone just accepted that this is the way things are. Again, a story that I've got is a barrister I know. He's somebody I would say is from the old guard, and he's got a very eccentric manner, and he had a sort of very difficult relationship with a man who became a recorder, which is a part-time judge. So a barrister, sort of 9% of the time, 10% of the time they'll sit as a judge. And every day in Cardiff Crown Court, he would say to him, "Good morning, so-and-so." Am I allowed to swear in this podcast, by the way? Because this is yeah, okay. He would say, "Good morning, so-and-so," and he'd say, "Fuck off. Fuck you can." Every day, "Fuck off. Fuck yourself." And then one day, the chap who's telling me the story was in court, and this chap who would tell him to fuck off was sitting as a judge. And he went, "Mr. So-and-so, what have I ever done to you?" And he stood up and went, "Well, Your Honour, for the last 2 years in the corridors and roving rooms of this court, you've told me to go fuck myself. And again, yeah, that sort of thing. There would have been a complaint in now, I think, and things would have happened. Whereas that was how I chose to resolve it.
Yeah, I mean, I was a witness to that kind of stuff all the time. Yeah, and people drinking at lunchtimes and coming back pissed, doing speeches, half cut. But the court staff were in on it. They'd call you up and say, "Oh, you can stay a bit longer. You know, the juror's not ready, so stay for another half an hour." But all these barristers had come back drunk.
I can give you an example actually as to how the sort of culture has changed within the bar as well. I mean, when I worked for the Bar Council initially, it was very, very stuffy organisation, and that extended to all the advice on professional conduct that we gave. I remember we had a call from this woman who said, "What I'd like to do is put my name and logo on my car, so I can advertise myself when I drive around as a barrister." And literally, people at the Bar Council thought she was absolutely nuts. That advertising was a real dirty word at the time,
Yeah.
and it only I'm not sure exactly when you were permitted to advertise, but it was very kind of strict circumstances, and it still is, even with the solicitors profession. You can't do kind of mail. You can't just carpet bomb mail people, for example. It has to be targeted. But now, I mean, obviously with social media and everything, I mean, it's completely changed, and I think it is, as Laura was saying, probably much well, it's more relaxed in that sense. Maybe that's gone the other way in terms of advertising, but yeah, promotion was a real kind of dirty word when I joined the Bar Council in the sort of very late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I'm still very uneasy about anything which is kind of public in terms of publicity or kind of advertising, because of that heritage of,
Yeah.
you were told you absolutely could not advertise. That was not a thing you could do at the bar. And if anybody even came close to it, I mean, even handing out cards was seen as a bit seedy.
Yeah.
It's like your business card, and they would say, "Well, that's very unseemly. You
Well,
shouldn't do that."
I'm friendly with the employment barrister Daniel Barnett, and he many years ago started this mailing list for about employment law, and apparently he had a real kind of going over by his chambers at the very thought that he would be sending a mail shot out every week telling people what the latest things that are happening in the employment law world, and it's become a hugely successful mailing list now. I mean, everybody signs up to it now, but at the time it started, he had real opposition again from his own chambers.
Yeah, I think that quite sums it up, actually. So, as Laura was saying, it's much more commercial now, commercially kind of astute. And in the old days, there were a lot of people in my chambers, the older lot, who were just doing the job for fun. And a lot of them would say, I'd do this even if I wasn't paid, because they were toffs who didn't need to be paid. And they were like, "Oh, yeah, I'll do it for nothing." And they would
Something to
roll
do.
up. Yeah, for something to do. Yeah, a gentleman's profession, or
Yeah.
whatever. But yeah, it's not that now.
Yeah, one of my friends, when I was a pupil, he said to me the difference between, so his wife's also a barrister, she was my pupil supervisor. He said, the difference between me and Harriet is Harriet's a proper lawyer, I'm just a wheeler dealer. He was like, he had this idea, which was that he thought we're not addressing this market. There's this big market out there. Give me a directory. And he just sat there one day in his room and just rang up all of the solicitors in this particular part of Wales and said, "I'm a barrister, I'm ready to do work, call me." And just got all of this work, and just by doing stuff like that. And yeah, back then that would have been seen as so obscene and dirty. Whereas now it's like, again, like if James's example, if my chamber said to me, "Oh, you can't do that," I would say, oh, I'm going then. I wouldn't have any loyalty really to my chambers if they decided to, tell me I couldn't do things. I'd say, well, I'm off, And I
Yeah.
don't think that was the way back then.
Do you
Yeah,
think
the
it
most
was
you could do was you could turn up to court, you'd do your case, and then just wait around and maybe pick up another brief. That would be seen as being quite, industrious as a well, he waited there all day and picked up another brief or whatever. Yeah, probably walking around persuading clients to sack their lawyers.
Do you think that was a class thing? Do you think because it was before, quite a sort of, people from rich families went into law, and now that it's more diverse and more well represented by all, sort of race, sex, whatever, do you think that's why it's become, do you think that was that whole sort of, sort of
100%.
snobbery, really?
I would say that is it, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is completely the reason. And, times have changed in order to allow the profession to become more diverse, and which means that you have to uproot all of those systems. A bit like I think. Do you think publishing has changed over the years?
Yeah, I guess. Well, I guess so. I guess.
Because the model seems very different. I remember kind of 10 years ago there were many fewer novels around. Now there seems to be thousands and thousands of books everywhere.
I think
But
because
it gives it diversity.
Yeah, I think but also, there's definitely publishing houses that sort of address the diversity and equality, but there's also people can self-publish, so you don't have to have a publisher. So I think that's why, and things like Kindle, ebooks, that sort of thing has definitely opened up a bigger scope. I mean, if you think back, if you go back to sort of, I'm thinking of sort of Jane Austen and, back to those times where women weren't allowed to write, they had to write as a man. And then that still does happen in a certain way, doesn't it, Laura? Because you've got your LJ, I see. Is that because you didn't?
No, that was because there's another fantastic novelist, Laura Shepherd Robinson.
Yes.
And obviously she's a Sunday Times bestseller, and I wanted to keep my name if I could.
Yeah.
But I thought just having my initials separated it just enough. I mean, I think that we had a lot of discussion about this, what I should be, but but I think coming back to Imran's point about why things have changed, class is huge, but I think it's also when you open up things and things become more accessible and become more diverse, and this is a profession that has way further to go on these things.
Yeah,
it also, you get more competition. And so people can't rest on their laurels anymore. And with competition comes this sense of, you've got to do something to put yourself in a market. And it went from being something where you would get a brief, I don't know, for whatever reason. Now it's you get the brief because the solicitor wants this particular person, and it's because of their marketing and things like that.
Interesting. Really interesting. We've got some hellos from people watching. Kaz has said, does anybody have a pet peeve or thing that is often wrong about how law is represented in fiction that you'd like to correct?
So I'm gonna let somebody else start because I've got loads.
Can I mention that TV series where the prosecutor, it turned out, was raped by the defendant. She was cross-examining, and I was amazed that more fuss wasn't made about that. I mean, it was just totally ridiculous.
Oh, that's I can't remember the. Oh, yeah, I thought it was on Netflix.
Anatomy of a Scandal.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, Sarah Vaughan. Yeah.
Anatomy of a Scandal.
Yeah, and actually, I think it was quite well received. But when I saw that, I just fell off my chair. I just could not believe that was so. Just the worst example of trying to tell a story at the expense of reality. Really,
I think again, on a professional ethics point of view, coming from James's perspective, is the sort of question I'm asked more often than anything is, how could you defend somebody knowing they're guilty? And even though I don't do crime anymore, that was something I did loads. I mean, for me, this is probably not a great thing to say, but I sort of tended to believe that, I don't know, like a good 7, maybe even 9 out of 10 of the people that I'd be representing, they had done it. And if they hadn't done what they were accused of, they'd done something pretty similar and that was also probably criminal. But it was the 1 in 10 or the however many in 10 where you thought this is an innocent person, where I was like, God, what am I going to do? I could be responsible for a miscarriage of justice here. I'm suddenly the last bastion between this person and prison. That's the scary thing. I sort of get a bit frustrated in crime fiction sometimes where people really struggle with the idea of representing somebody who's guilty. That's like day one of being a barrister. If you can't do that, if you can't represent somebody who you disagree with or dislike, don't do it. You're just not going to be able to.
Yeah, I mean, they'd never have a medical show where the person would say, "Well, I'm not operating on him. He's has a different political perspective than me," or "Oh, this person's committed a crime. I don't think I can." So, and it's the same. One of my pet peeves is that we apparently, as barristers, make up defences for defendants.
Yeah.
As if we could just construct a defence for them when they might not have one. Or if they tell us that they're guilty, we can still carry on representing them. That's a pet peeve. I have pet peeves where instead of cross-examining a witness and by asking questions, they're just making speeches. They're just kind of making speeches at a time when you would be torn apart for making a speech. A judge would just say, "Just ask. You're here to ask questions, not start pointing fingers." Objection, move to strike. That annoys me when it's in British TV because we don't have any of that. Gavels. I don't like gavels because we don't have gavels in the courtroom. I get annoyed by a lot. Brown shoes. Barristers who wear brown shoes. That annoys me. That doesn't happen in real life.
Oh, I know somebody who does, but he's an exception. Yeah, he wears navy suits and brown shoes. So there we go.
That's terrible.
Was this sort of like a uniform? Like you're saying it like that's a thing. Is that like a thing that you're supposed to wear black shoes?
You can't wear brown shoes. It's ridiculous.
I was picked up by a barrister actually about a detail in my indefensible book where when the barrister meets his client who's up for a grisly murder, he shakes his hand, and the barrister said, "Oh, barristers never shake the hands of clients." And I just wondered, is that an old-fashioned thing, or
I've heard that.
So the rule seems that the accepted rule is barristers don't shake hands with one another, and the reason for that came about because it would sometimes convince defendants that they were stitching them up, that they were doing some kind of deal, that they were mates.
Right.
So barristers are not supposed to shake hands with one another. I break that rule all the time. But clients, shake hands all the time with clients.
Yeah.
I mean, unless they're the kind of client who, when you look at them, you think you haven't washed your hands in about 6 months. you might want to stay away. And there are a lot of those. There are some you just stay away from. But on the whole, the clean ones, you can take some sanitizer with you. I
was going to say, back in the days of COVID, you definitely wouldn't want to touch anybody's hands.
I did trials. I did trials at home on the Zoom link, civil trials.
Wow.
In criminal cases, we did them behind plastic screens, like separated miles from everybody else, and jurors would come in with. But it was the weirdest thing. It was the strangest thing. It feels like it's not like it didn't happen. Now, when you think about it, it feels like a fever dream. But they kind of worked all this out. You could I had to cross-examine somebody. It turned out he was in bed. The judge was because he was from neck upwards and thought he could persuade everybody that he was properly dressed, and he didn't even have any clothes on. And the judge was furious. Made him come into court. He said, "Right, this is ridiculous. You're in bed. I'm going to adjourn this for 2 weeks, and we're going to do it in actual court."
I had a case in lockdown where I was representing. It was a personal injury case, and my client was wearing a sports bra, and she was a personal trainer, and part of the sort of case was about whether she was really injured or not, and because she'd been putting these promotional videos on Facebook of her giving it 10 bells to a punch back when she was supposed to have all sorts of back injuries and things. But she turned up, and I don't know whether it was just she didn't realise the sort of. I mean, I'm not saying that people don't really tend to wear suits to court anymore. People do, come quite smart casual. But I did think that was quite. No, like clients and things, but, and jurors don't wear suits or anything anymore. But but yeah, I did think that was something that I just saw the judge's eyes sort of feel like this, and I thought, oh God, this is not helpful.
I can definitely see why you've all got so much to write about, because I could just like listen to you like just talking about, you know, what you do. It sounds really fascinating. Donna's asking, on the opposite side of the negative, what's frequently done well? So what, or isn't there anything?
That's I mean, obviously these guys do their stuff really well. But I think that's because they're lawyers, and lawyers do the stuff which makes you believe that you're in a courtroom, I think, really well, because they know the detail. They know what an usher is. They know what an usher does. They know what it sounds like when court is opened and closed. They know what kind of things a judge might say, or how a cross-examination might be structured, or a question might be structured. So yeah, I think certainly all lawyers who do it, I think, do it well. But also a lot of so I was just going to say a lot of non-lawyers also do it well, and I think that's because they've either had very, very good research or very good consultants helping.
Somebody who is a lawyer whose books I really like is Steve Kavanagh, and I think his books are great. I love the cross-examination in them. He just has this ability that every single time he does a cross-examination, there's something really, really interesting and clever going on, and he's always got a really good, like, each one has a great hook, and I love that. I think that's my favorite thing to read is when there's a really good cross-examination and you're thinking, oh yeah, he's got them on the ropes there, or you know, that sort of thing.
I was on a panel with him. My first ever panel was with Steve, and we were talking about authenticity. And I said, well, you've got to write about what you know. And for example, you can't really kind of convincingly write about New York if you've never been to New York, for example. Steve went, I'll have you know that all my books are set in New York, and I've never been. I was like, oh, I'm really sorry.
What's next for you all? What are you working on at the moment? Have you got another book? Have you got other books planned, or are you writing at the moment?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So yeah, I've just handed in book 2, which is, again, it's going to be a legal thriller with a sort of speculative edge to it. I can't say too much about it at this stage, but this time I'm writing from the perspective of a jury. So having been a little bit obsessed with these people for years and trying to convince them, I wanted to write from the perspective of somebody who's on a jury, because it's another type of persuasion, another type of advocacy in a way, is if you believe something and you've got to persuade the other 11 people in the room of what you believe in. So that's what I've gone for.
The 12 Angry Men thing, yeah. I think it's great. It's a great hook. I have just been greenlit on a TV show. So it's a legal drama. So I've been working on that. It's long, I think. It takes forever to get anywhere. So, but that's what I'm currently doing, and I've just about 3/4 of the way through the next book, which is I'm delivering to the US for my US publishers. So that's what I'm doing. Laura was so thrilled by that story, she left.
She's going to say she's disappeared. I'll wait for her to come back in. She must have, her internet might have just dropped a little bit. Sometimes that does that. We'll wait for her to come back. Oh, yeah, here she comes. Where is she? Here she is. You're back.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. At least it was towards the end rather than the beginning.
No, that's okay. We were just Imran was saying you were just so excited by that story that you left.
Yeah. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm writing the screenplay for a courtroom drama. I think it's going to be 6-parter.
So your first book was made into a BBC drama.
Yeah.
Because Laura's just saying that your book was actually the first book she read for a real life book club, and it was interesting to see how they adapted it for TV. Were you able to have input into that?
Yeah, I was the executive producer on that. I don't really know what that meant, and I don't think it means anything. But what did did happen was that they sent me the scripts, and Tom Edge, who wrote it, would send me the legal bits and say, "Oh, what do you think about this?" And he let me rewrite them so that they were more kind of in line with what. But he's such a great writer that when I was reading the scripts, I genuinely was reading the scripts thinking, oh, fuck, he's done this much better than I had written the book. Parts of the screenplay were much better, but also some of it he had to write in that particular way because how I'd written it just wasn't visual enough or wasn't interesting enough visually. That the way he did it was for the screen. I think it's a different art form, but yeah, I was very happy with that.
I think it can be, some people find it quite difficult to sort of let go of their original story to pass it on, because quite often it does get changed, considerably. But I guess if you're going to sign up for that, you do hand it over, and it's somebody else's baby.
Yeah, I didn't mind that at all. I was like, you take it, do what you want. If it's great, I'll take credit for it. If it's terrible, I can say I had nothing to do with this. This was
And James?
So I'm working on a book set in the 1980s, very soon after the Brighton bomb, the attempted assassination of Margaret Thatcher. My fictional story begins with two barristers getting married, and they go back to their honeymoon suite, and they're both blown up. And it's assumed it's the work of the IRA, because it's a very similar bomb to the one in Brighton. But about a barrister who's in the same chambers as one starts to think that it's a kind of political expediency to try and prosecute an IRA member because they still haven't caught the Brighton bomber at that stage, and she starts to investigate the murder of her best friend, basically. So it's a kind of legal political thriller, I guess.
I love that.
Sounds fascinating. Oh, I can't believe we've had an hour already. It's gone so quickly. Thank you so much for joining us. Good luck with your next books. Thank you for sharing with us this afternoon all the secrets of law and the bar and ethics. I've absolutely loved it. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Imran. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Good luck with your books.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you.